EP Magazine's annual Summer Fun issue has articles that focuses on fun activities, as well as helping reduce or avoid academic or behavioral regression over the summer. The disruption of familiar routines, environments, and limited access to school-based and other support services can be difficult for some children, especially those with special needs. Read it today at www.epmagazine.com.
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of Reach Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, Two Lives at Once. And with every wreath you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. Two Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, two lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Suicide is preventable, and each of us has a role to play in suicide prevention.
Suicide is complex. There is no single cause.
And it's not always a mental health issue. It could be loss of a job or home, financial or relationship issues, pain, or leaving the military.
Suicide does not discriminate. It affects all ages, races, and genders, veterans or not.
If you know a veteran who is struggling, connect with them. Let them know help is available.
There is quick and easy access to services in times of crisis.
Dial 988, then press 1. Talking about it is okay.
Don't keep it inside. Don't be ashamed. Don't wait. Reach out.
Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis. I am your host. Oscar Mike Radio is part of the Hubazoo Network. You can find out more on hubazoo.com. I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asek of Asek Real Estate, Army National Guard veteran Mark Holmes of Reapers Detailing and Power Washing, and my supporters, Cason Shaving Company, Black Cat Designs, and Exceptional Parent Magazine. Again, we're starting off the latter part of this year. It's gone by quick, and we've talked to many different people in many different places in their life, in their journey with veterans advocacy. And my next guest is no different. I'm pleased to introduce Marine Corps veteran, author, minister, and CEO of a foundation, Jeremy Stalnecker. Did I get that right?
You got it right, man. Thank you.
First time. Mr.
Yeah, first
Stalnecker,
time.
welcome to Oscar Mike Radio. Semper Fi Marine. It's always good having Marines here.
Yeah, we talk the same language, so it cuts out the need to work through it, right? So we can get right to the heart of this thing. So no, thank you, Travis. I really appreciate it.
I don't know about you, sir, but I like going to the good stuff, like right off the bat.
Me too. I don't like working our way there. Let's just get there.
Right.
Get there.
Let's get after it. So, I got the email about what you do and would you come on, and we started talking back and forth, and I got really interested in your story. And you have a very varied, typical Marine Corps type of career that I want to get into. But you have this thing where you served in the Marine Corps, you came out, you did some different things, and now you're in the space of PTSD advocacy and healing. So it's extremely interesting to me for a lot of reasons. But before we get into all the good stuff, and ladies and gentlemen, it's all good, tell us a little bit about, Jeremy the Marine.
Yeah. So, I'll tell you the short version. I was raised in a very conservative Christian home. And so when your dad's a pastor, which mine was, um, other people who are in that world will understand this. That's kind of the family business, right? Like the kids are expected to go into ministry. And there are a lot of influences in my life when I was a young person, 10, 11, 12 years old, some books that I read, some people that I met. We had a very close family friend who was a World War II veteran. And my dad would take me over to his house and we'd sit down and just talk to him. And he couldn't walk very well. So, I mean, as a little kid, for hours, I'd sit there and he'd talk about the Marine Corps and just the things that he had done. So I had these influences in my life and this kind of call to doing something bigger and, all that stuff we talk about and particularly talk about in the Marine Corps. And I remember when I was 14 years old, going to my dad and saying, "Hey, would it be okay if I didn't go into ministry, if I pursued something else?" And he said, "Son, you need to do whatever you believe you're supposed to do, right?" And that's the right answer. I said, "I'm glad to hear you say that because I think I'm supposed to enlist in the Marine Corps." He's like, "God would never want you to enlist in the Marine Corps. That can't be God. That's something else." And we talked, and he said, "Look, I'll support you in whatever you do,
No,
but
wait a minute, sir. Wait a minute, sir. Just
yeah,
if I
go
may.
ahead.
Now,
Yeah, you can do anything you want."
I've read the Bible a couple times.
Yeah.
I mean, how can ministers say that in one breath and then preach about Joshua and the Battle of Jericho in the next breath?
Right.
Right. I mean,
I
I'm
I
just saying.
think so. Okay,
I
I
was a
have four.
Marine.
I have four kids, and I have a son who's a police officer. He's 23 years old, and then I have a 14-year-old son. So I have two daughters, but I have two sons. My 14-year-old wants to go into the military, wants to be a corpsman actually, and he talks about this, and it's so crazy because that's a great question, right? It's so crazy because I'm all about the military and military service, and I served and all this. When you hear your kids say it, though, particularly if you've done it, right? You're like, man, I don't know. Maybe we should look at something else. So I
It
think
does
there was
hit
some
different.
of that. I think there was some of that.
It does hit differently
It hits
because
different.
a couple of my sons want to join. I'm like, do you love running?
Right. Right.
Well, so
Right.
so I get it. I get it.
So you're trying to talk him out of it, right? But my dad, I mean, that was, really, I think what it was for him is we'll support whatever you want to do, but I want you to be sure that's what you're supposed to do. And so they supported me in it. They wanted me to go to college first, which led me to a commissioning program. So I was commissioned out of college, served with 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division out here in Southern California, Camp Pendleton. Had a traditional deployment with a rifle platoon. It was awesome. I was part of a helicopter company. Went to the 31st MEU, which for the Marines is, that's not a highlight of anyone's career, I don't think. But it was awesome because we got to do a lot of cool training and we were on and off ship and, whatever. But my final deployment was with what we called in our battalion, the counter mechanized platoon. Again, for the Marines out there, I was part of weapons company. I had there are different ways to task organize this. The way our battalion did it is all of these assets were put into one very large platoon. I had 84 Marines, 18 vehicles, all the anti-armor assets, so the tows and javelins, had all the heavy machine gun assets. So we were, it's funny, as a platoon commander, as a first lieutenant, I had a bigger platoon than some of the companies in our battalion. And that's how we deployed to Iraq. So my last deployment was to Iraq in 2003. Kuwait first. And then we breached the berm, went into Iraq. We were part of the initial movement into the country. Did that, made our way to Baghdad. The Battle of Baghdad on April 10th was also 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. And that was my last fight. And then we transitioned back and I transitioned out of the Marine Corps. So it was kind of the highlights, but yeah, it was a crazy time.
That's fine. That's fine. So, a lot of Marines in that time frame kind of talk about the same thing. Army too. Nothing against the Air Force or Navy, but it's different because they typically aren't on the ground right near the action, if you will. But reading about you get out of the Marine Corps, and it's almost like you were called back into service. Yeah. I thought that was very interesting, and I wondered where that came from because it's some people have a really easy time in transition. Some people have a much harder time, and some people like yourself, where it's almost like, hey, I get out and now this purpose is in front of me. I want to know if you would dig into that for us.
Yeah, so there's kind of a lot behind that, but I started to look toward the end of, my first contract, and am I going to stay in or am I going to get out? Again, there's a lot of factors here.
Sure.
I went to, officer candidate school in 1996. So most of my time in the Marine Corps was at peacetime Marine Corps. Then 9/11 happened. 1-5 was waved off at the last minute to go to Afghanistan. We all believed the wars were going to end quick, right? This is not going to be a 20-year thing. And so for me as an infantry officer, I looked down the road and I thought, all right, I missed my one chance to go to combat. And I can't imagine spending the rest of my career in, kind of the 90s peacetime Marine Corps. And so I had an opportunity to transition out of the Marine Corps when my contract ended and start working at our church, our local church. I was, I don't have a Bible degree, but our pastor knew that I had, leadership and some of the things I had done. So come and work for us. And so I put in my package to get out of the Marine Corps, almost simultaneous to us getting the orders then to, instead of going back to Okinawa for another 31st MU deployment, go to Kuwait. And then Iraq happened, right? And so all that happened at the same time, but I had already made the decision to transition out. My wife, founded us a house in Oceanside. We stayed in Oceanside. I had made a commitment to the church. And again, same thing, even with Iraq, we all assume this is going to be over pretty quick.
Right.
So I got called up to the big show, right? And I get to do what very few have ever done. This is amazing. And when it's over, it's going to be done. And then, it kind of was. The president said, mission accomplished. This is it. We had no idea what would be coming after that, but I made that transition into church ministry, and it was a calling, and it was moving from one calling to another. I will say I had a really rough transition personally because my identity was so wrapped up in, being a Marine and the infantry world and combat, that it took me a while to work through that. But definitely felt like I was being driven in a mission sense.
So, if I remember the Bible verse correctly, you're taking your sword, you're turning into a plowshare, and you're tilling the field. In this case, the field is, the church, the body of Christ, all that stuff. That had to be a different kind of transition for you. What was it like taking all that physical armor off and putting on the whole armor of God?
Man, it was tough. And I think it was tough for a few reasons. One, it was 2003 and no one was talking about post-traumatic stress. No one was talking about combat trauma. Certainly in the church world, that wasn't a conversation that was being had. So when I left the Marine Corps, I really felt like I had, jumped into space and I was free falling. My identity was wrapped up in what I had done in the Marine Corps. So even though I was in this church environment, and again, as you mentioned, mission driven and felt called to that, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how I was supposed to act in this new environment. I became frustrated. I got very angry. My battalion, 1-5, deployed back to Iraq, the first Battle of Fallujah. They were there. So all these Marines I had served with and said I would take care of were now some being killed, being hurt. All of this was happening in Fallujah while I'm in this like ministry setting, working with volunteers, trying to figure this thing out. And so it was a very, very difficult period for me to get my feet back under me. And thankfully I had some people come along, the pastor of that church, my wife, my family, some friends, after some time confront me with like, this behavior is not okay. You've got to figure this out. We're going to walk this out with you. And so it took some time, but it was a difficult transition for me to finally understand, all right, this is a new mission. This is a new purpose. This is a new direction, and figure out how to take those steps into that.
So no road to Damascus moment, but definitely had to take a step of faith here and embrace your new mission. And I'm just curious, I went to San Diego MCRD and did some time in Camp Pendleton, where the real Marine Corps is, sir. So I'm familiar with Oceanside.
Yeah.
What's it like having a church in Oceanside, just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the gates at Camp Pendleton.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, the church that I attend is a pretty large church, but probably 25% of the people there are either in the Marine Corps or connected to the Marine Corps, right? You got
Yeah.
family and all of that. So right now it's different, but go back to 2004, 2005, 2007 during the plus up and all that, you'd have half of your church deploying at a time. And so it was a crazy time, but kind of a special time in a sense, because once I started to figure some of my stuff out, you're now ministering to these families who I know exactly what their husbands are going through. I know exactly what they're dealing with right now. And my wife knows how to come alongside some of those spouses. And so we had a class, and it was packed every week because it was like the spouse, right? Whoever was left behind, and they'd come, and it was a really special time, I guess, in that sense too. But it's awesome to be in a place where you're ministering to families who are going through stuff, and you know exactly what they're going through.
So that's one aspect. I'm kind of going to jump ahead in that regard a little bit, but that's one aspect that I am told over and over again. I think of the Family Flex study that Columbia University is doing and other advocacy groups, where a lot of the family members, wives especially, and the kids feel, disconnected from mom or dad
Yeah.
if they're serving, that there's challenges there that I can't even describe.
Yeah.
What is it like ministering to that family unit as a whole instead of just the veteran only?
Yeah, it's very important. I will say that.
Okay.
And I think when you're around military bases, you do find churches and faith communities, I'll broaden that out, faith communities that do a good job with this. And it's a lot of things. One, it's just ministering or meeting felt needs, right? It's having days, we would do this a lot. Other churches do this where, hey, if your spouse is deployed, bring your car on a Saturday. We got people here going to change the oil and do all that stuff. If you need, whatever you need, we got a team that's ready to come and fix stuff in your house. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. And it's just those felt needs, just trying to take some pressure off, right? It's having days where we've got childcare set up. So mom, you're home by yourself and you want to get away for a few hours. We've got a place you can drop the kids off. They'll take care of them. So you can go do whatever you want to do, nothing, right? Just get a break. And then it's being there for them during the ups and downs of a deployment, when a spouse or family member is hurt, when there's the loss of a loved one. It's being able to lean into that. And I think what's unique about faith communities near military bases is they have people within that community that get it. Because in a lot of places, I wouldn't even, the people who are there would be like, well, I don't even know how to talk to them because I've never
Right.
experienced that, or had a spouse, killed in combat, or, all of those things we would talk about, and we would talk about very organically. Most people in the country have no context for that. And so it is super powerful when you're in a community of people who get it and are willing to lean into it, and just meeting those needs and being there for them.
So you're serving in this capacity, starting off after your Marine Corps service, and you finally get your compass pointed the right way, and you're
Yeah.
moving in this space. What's happening to you as you're doing this? As you're unpacking or putting away your Marine Corps side, you're taking your same mission focus and you're embracing this new way to serve in a different theater, if you will. What's
Yeah.
happening to you as you're doing this, Jeremy?
A lot of growth was happening. And this is important when we start talking about continuing to serve those who are serving or have served, and ministering, or, reaching out to, advocating for people who are struggling. That for me, part of the process of moving forward was kind of putting the Marine Corps behind me.
Yeah.
Again, I'm in a place where I can serve people who have served, and I was happy to do that and excited about it, but I didn't stay connected to anyone that I served with. I didn't make phone calls. There was no connection. And part of that was personal. I had such a hard time when I left the Marine Corps and tried to walk that out, because I kept looking over my shoulder. I kept saying things like, I should go back there. I should do that. That was important. This isn't, that kind of silly stuff we say, that I just really walked away from my own service and really focused on, at a point, I had a family and a spouse and a ministry and those things. So a lot of personal growth was taking place. and I think there were a lot of opportunities to serve. But one of the things I did was separate my service from, who I was.
Yeah.
And it took about 10 years, and I could tell that story, but it took 10 years or so before I was reconnected to that and realized I still had an obligation to serve those who I had served with.
During this time, you've written 3 books that I know of, March or Die, Offensive Faith, which I want to dig into that one. I like that, and
Yeah.
Leadership by Design. When did the idea or need to write about your experiences and how to advocate come to mind, and what led you to put pen to paper, Jeremy?
I had, so two things happened kind of at once. The 10th anniversary of the Battle of Baghdad on April 10th happened, and I was pastoring a church. I had a little blog that I'm not sure anyone read, but it was a good outlet for me. And I sat down and just reflecting on that, I started to put down some lessons learned. So we had these battles, we had these things happen in Iraq, and here are some practical lessons that anyone can use from that. That became the book March or Die. And that was really just me just kind of walking through that myself and putting it down. Well, that blog was received incredibly well, and it started to get passed around to the people that I had served with, that had been there with me. And what I found was, as I shared the lessons that I had learned and was learning, that they were able to connect to that. And in a sense, it kind of redeemed some of those experiences, because instead of just being an experience that we had, now it meant something. And so those guys started to reach back out to me. And this is like 10 years after we had come back, 10 years after I left the Marine Corps. And I had walked away from all of that. About the same time, I had one of those Marines reach out to me and say, "Hey, we got this guy who's starting this organization, Mighty Oaks. He's just getting started, and he's having a hard time getting veterans to come be a part of it." And so he told me, this is the guy I'm talking to, if I would bring some of the guys from the old platoon, he'd do a session for us. And this was Chad Robichaux, who's the founder of Mighty Oaks, was getting started. And this Marine reached out to me, and so, like, I haven't talked to any of these guys in 10 years. It's probably time, right? And so I went to this thing, and Chad was getting started with Mighty Oaks. That's when we met. And from that time on, we've been friends, and I've worked with Mighty Oaks. That's when we met. But something happened there.
Okay.
I had always been proud of the fact that I brought these Marines home. We had some guys hurt in combat, no one killed. We were very successful. We came home. It was amazing. I was proud of that. I've got this picture hanging up in my office. It's right here next to me, actually. That is my platoon in Baghdad, and I've always been so proud of that. And then I'm hearing these stories 10 years later of these Marines who I served with, who I said I would take care of, who had come home and committed suicide, who had come home and destroyed their marriages, who were struggling every day just to kind of get through the day. And I realized for the first time, right, and it's crazy, but it took me 10 years, realized for the first time that I still had an obligation, that when you put your uniform in the closet, so to speak, right, for the last time, your obligation to those that you served with doesn't end. And I still had an obligation. I had worked through some things. I had learned some things, and I needed to use that to help other people. And really, that was kind of the moment, if you will, for me, where I realized, like, oh, like I still have a calling, if you will, to serve those Marines. And those Marines for me at the time was very specific. It was like very specific group of Marines, but that became really what we've been doing for the last, 12 years or 13 years.
You start serving these Marines in this way. Now, for the people who don't know, what is Mighty Oaks? And you're plugged in as executive director, but how is that grown to be a part of what you do? Because you're very entwined with that mission focus, and it definitely leads to a lot of the advocacy that you do.
Yeah, so it really started out, and then it was Chad, and then me, combat Marines who had struggled and found hope and healing and direction, reaching out to people we knew. And that was kind of how it started. And we'll spend 5 days with you. We'll talk about trauma, but we're Christians. It's a faith-based organization. So instead of addressing this clinically, as a lot of people do, and there's some great helps on the clinical side, we're going to address this kind of from the, the spiritual, the foundational side. So understanding that if we were created with purpose, then in spite of what's happened to us, what we've struggled with, we can continue to move forward. That stuff doesn't go away, but it doesn't have to chain us up. We can move into a new purpose and into a new hope and a new direction. And so we just started doing that. And the idea was, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, we'd have one of these week-long retreats. But it's crazy, right? When people get help, they reach out to other people they know that need help and they bring them along. And so we've had 5,100 plus graduates come through one of those week-long programs. We have this year 37 weeks of programming. It's been unbelievable. So it went from like, let's help the people we know, to so many people need this. Let's do everything we can to help as many people as possible.
Well, that's outstanding. One of the things we were kind of chatting before we got recording that I'm hoping you can, give me some perspective on is a lot of people learned about PTSD and the 22 a day back in the 2014 and 2016 timeline. In fact, that's one of the reasons why, I got started was because of that. And fast forward 10, 12 years later, some people are starting to ask like, well, have we made any progress, or what's really effective? We've had, dogs, horses, emotional support animals, all this stuff, yoga, and it's all good. Even the VA has looked at different clinical ways to deal with this. And there is a faith-based component, but I am asked, are we making progress? Are we stemming the tide at all? And, I like to use numbers, but it's more than just numbers because it's a human life here. So, how do you feel about that, Jeremy? Are we stemming the tide? Are we making progress? Or are we just doing good to get through the day?
I think there's a few ways to look at that.
Okay.
One of the simplest ways to look at it is this. If you help a person, you save a life, then I think all of us would agree that whatever effort was involved in that was worthwhile.
Okay.
So that has to be the starting point, right? Is we can't say, well, if it's not, this percent or X number or something. I mean, how do you quantify a life? And so I think that's where you have to start. If you help one person, then it was worth the effort and the energy and the time and all of those things. So that's one thing. I think another thing that really makes this a difficult conversation to have is even if you separate out the military. So let's just look at culture and society.
Okay.
Let's talk about suicide. The suicide rate 2023 in the United States of America, this is outside of the military, was higher than it's been at any other point in history. Maybe that's because we're doing a better job of counting. I don't know what it is, but over 50,000 suicides in the United States last year. So we see this correlation happening in the military, and it's very hard for us to parse out what is happening because of military service, what's happening because of trauma, what's happening because of, these factors that we talk about, and what's happening kind of incidentally. They were in the military, have been in the military, but also culture is struggling so much. We've got the opioid crisis, and we've got mental health issues, and we've got, political partisanship and all these things we talk about. We had COVID and the lockdowns during COVID. Studies were done during that time. The DoD said that suicide rates went up in the active duty community 25% during COVID. So we have all of these other factors, right? And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because it's very hard to put your finger on the thing that's causing it. And we need to, again, know there's a lot of problems, but we need to do everything we can. And I think in a lot of different areas to address it. I think the clinical response in some ways is helpful. The psychological response in some ways is helpful. Those therapies can be helpful for sure. And I really advocate, obviously, for faith-based solutions. And I think what we need to do when we think about this is, and this is what we advocate for, is giving the veteran or the service member choice. And that's where I think we miss it. That was a really long kind of way to get to what I'm talking about here. But I think all of them can be helpful. I think faith establishes the foundation on which the rest of them can be helpful. So we could talk about that. But at the end of the day, I think the service member or the veteran needs to have access to all of the above. and pursue that. And what we've done, I think, from the government standpoint, from the VA, is we have restricted your choices or your options to a few, and those few may not work for you. And that's why we have 44,000 veteran service organizations in the United States, because others are trying to put their own money, their own time, their own energy into meeting these other needs.
Well, let's focus on faith for this conversation, because again, that is your,
Yeah.
AO, for lack of a better term, and that's what
Yeah.
you know and do. And there's a lot of successful faith-based programs. Crosswinds is one of them that I know of,
Sure.
and 22-0 is also heavily based on faith. If you want that in that program, what makes faith-based so unique versus, say, a clinical psychologist or even medicinal? When I say medicinal, I'm thinking of cannabis therapy or other
Yeah.
medicines you can take for psychological issues. How does faith differ?
So this conversation on faith, there has to be a general agreement that we are spiritual beings, right?
Sure.
And again, people would disagree with that or something, but the faith conversation is important when you realize that so much of what we deal with as it relates to trauma and these other issues are soul wounds. They impact who we are uniquely. It hits us, morally. It hits our character and our worldview and all those things. It connects to who we were created to be, who we are spiritually. And when it does that, it breaks the foundation on which we can either build or rebuild our lives. So I have some very specific thoughts on faith, but generally, when I think about the difference between clinical treatments and therapies and faith-based solutions, I think of it in this sense. We have to have the right foundation, a solid foundation that addresses who we uniquely are, our identity, our purpose. It answers these big questions. Is there something beyond this life? Is there a calling beyond what I'm dealing with right now? We have to establish that foundation. And then if clinical therapies, medication, these things are helpful in building that life on that foundation, we're standing on a solid foundation that's not going to fall apart underneath us. I think what we do sometimes is we take those clinical approaches and we try to build a life without a foundation. And so eventually they're going to fall short. We have to be on something that's solid. Our perspective, my perspective, is that if you accept that God created, then you follow that down line. You also will at some point accept that God created with hope and purpose. So a person who is without hope or without purpose, who says there's nothing beyond this world, there's nothing beyond this life, there's nothing that speaks to who I uniquely am, why would they continue? Why, would they not, in moments of hopelessness and despair, kind of wallow in that or stay stuck in that, or all the things that we could talk about? It's understanding that there is something beyond this life. It's something in this life. It's a purpose that you have, a direction that you've been called to, that calls you forward. And then as those clinical approaches are also helpful, you add those. I talked to a clinician some time ago, and she said it this way. She said, I believe in therapies, psychological therapies. I believe in medication. And if faith helps somewhere down the road, then we'll also add that. My simple approach would be, we need to start with faith because it addresses who we are. It gives us purpose and a foundation to build a life on. And if the rest helps, we'll add that down the road. So for me, it's just flipping that approach on its head.
Okay. So let's say I'm a veteran or even active duty service member
Yep.
who does, believe, hey, you know what, there is a God. I believe there is something going on, and I have that first foundational level done. And I come to Mighty Oaks or your ministry. How do you, once you've established that there's a foundation, what happens next?
Yeah, well, that's great. Once you've established the foundation, so your foundation is faith. It is, God has a purpose for my life. God has called me to something bigger than just existing and struggling through this life. And, all the things that we get caught up in, addiction and all the rest of it. God's called me to something bigger than this. Once that realization happens, then we're able to help the man or the woman, whoever's had that realization, walk that out. Okay, now how do we put the pieces in your life that will allow you to be that person, the person you were created to be, the person you were called to be? Do we need to get you with, someone who does intense marriage counseling that can help you understand how to be married and how to think right and how to act right? And that's a big part of it. Maybe there's an addiction issue. Let's address the addiction issue. Maybe it's a character issue or a moral issue. Let's begin to put those pieces in place. And we can. If medication is needed at some point, again, most folks have access to that. But even medication and these other therapies, they should be limited term. We are seeking to get to a place of wholeness and healing, not just existing. And a lot of, clinical therapies, particularly medications, are, you'll take this medication forever. Maybe that's necessary, but in most cases it's not. It should serve as a tool to get you to the next step. And so we can walk that out, and we will. Someone comes to our program, we'll walk with them for at least 6 months. Every week they're contacting us or we're contacting them. We'll get them to the other resources that they need, and we'll continue to walk that out as long as they're willing.
Awesome. Now, what's going on as you're watching this person go through this? Because in some ways you've lived it. You had to, renew your mind and your purpose to get to this point. So it's a trade-off, right? You're watching them take their journey. You're guiding them. You're not, walking in their steps, but you've seen this before.
Yeah.
Hundreds of times, possibly. I'm not into assumptions here.
Yeah.
Does anything, come out of you, or do you feel anything as you're, taking that Marine possibly or sailor and helping them in their journey?
Yeah. I mean, we've seen this happen thousands of times, and it's a lot of things. In the beginning of doing this, there's always this, well, maybe it's not going to work this time, or maybe what we're talking about can't help this person. But as you see this happen again and again and again and again, what you realize is it comes down to a decision on the part of the person you're trying to help. Not everyone that comes to our program is helped. A very high percentage are, but not everyone. But it comes down to a decision. And so what we really focus on is pushing people to a point where they'll decide to begin moving forward again, where they'll understand there is hope, there is purpose, and it's going to be a long road, no question. This isn't a magic pill or something. There's going to be a long road. But if you'll start taking those steps, you can get there. And it's exciting because you know that in the first couple of days, it's going to be very difficult, hard work, digging in, trying to walk this out with people. They're very skeptical. But if you can get to the point where you're demonstrating, and this is, we tell our stories throughout the time they're with us. There's so much of, I know where you are because I've been there. I've struggled the way that you've struggled, but I found hope and I found some ways to move forward. So we're telling those stories all the time. And it's crazy to watch, and it's exciting to watch, and you'll never really lose, I don't think, the wonder of it. But just watching people come to that realization that, oh man, like, I'm not alone. There are people that struggle just like me. Other people who've had the same issues I've had, and they're doing great. They're moving forward. Their marriage has been restored or whatever. It's really fun to watch, isn't the right word, but there's a real burden when you go into it, because you just know if they'll just take these next steps, if they'll make the decision, man, their life could be so different. And so you push toward that, and then halfway through the week and toward the end of the week, you see it happen over and over and over again. And it's pretty exciting. And we've seen it so many times that you just know if they'll just make the decision, then there's a big, beautiful world out in front of them, and we'll help them get there.
So one of the things I just want to bounce this off you about not making the decision.
Yeah.
This is completely just, me in layman's terms. It seems like watching some people struggle, and in my own life, that, I'll use my life as an example. I got comfortable. I wouldn't say comfortable, but I got very familiar living in pain and discomfort. And it was, I knew what it was. I could categorize it. I could quantify it. I could apply attributes to it. So I knew what pain was in the different phases and forms. And Jeremy, it was really scary to start wanting to let that go. To get to that decision point where I wanted to let it go. Like, really, like if I let this go and I know what this is, what's going to happen. And intellectually, I knew that, hey, you know what? This is not really a good idea to live like this.
Right.
I'm not moving forward living like this. But man, but I know what this is. I know it. What was happening to me that, and I eventually let it go, which is why we're here. But man, I would I would have loved a shortcut or two so I didn't have to live there so long. So my point is, am I unusual in that respect? And what's happening when I'm going through that, or other people going through that?
It's so funny you say it that way, because it's so true. And we can all connect to that feeling of, I believe things could get better. I know they should be better, but I'm comfortable in my pain. It again is an identity thing. I'm identifying with that. And
Okay.
we can go, well, my trauma created this, and so I'm identifying with my trauma. You become the victim of what happened to you, but you find comfort in it. Here's how I sometimes describe it. It's like that show Hoarders. If you've ever seen the show Hoarders,
Yeah,
right?
well, the house full of stuff, or
Yeah,
house.
so you find people living in a house that's so full they can't move. You see these crazy episodes where they're like, they've gone to the bathroom around their chair because they can't move anymore. Family members who love them come in, they clear this thing out, they renovate the whole thing, and inevitably that person will sit in the middle of a beautiful home that's empty and start crying because they lost their stuff. It's crazy to watch that show, because you watch these people, they're so angry that things have changed. And I think emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, we're all kind of hoarders. We like what we have. We like what's normal to us. And if we can blame it on something else, even better, right? So a big part of causing people to, or helping people get to that place where they'll make that decision, is really digging them out of that. Like, and part of that's personal responsibility. Look, it's not okay for you to behave this way. It doesn't matter what's happened to you. It's not okay. Now, there may be a reason, but it doesn't make your bad behavior okay. You're not a victim. Maybe something happened to you, but your identity shouldn't be wrapped up in that. There's so much more in front of you. It's having those conversations to really dig people out of that comfort zone, for lack of a better term. I mean, why is it that some people transition from one place to another, they do well and they keep moving? Because they want to keep moving forward. But our natural inclination is to just hang on to what's comfortable, even as bad as it feels sometimes. The fear of change, the
Yes.
fear of what's out in front of us overwhelms us, and we're willing to trade off a hopeful future for a difficult, depressed present because of the fear of what might be. And we've got to move beyond that. And that's why we, in our program, spend so much time telling our stories. Everyone who teaches, everyone who's a part of our program came as a student. And so they came as a student, we trained them up, and now they're teaching a class, and it's always the first 15 minutes of their class is their story. It's, again, I struggle with this. I had this problem. This thing was going on in my life. And then I made a decision. My book, March or Die, that's the principle of that phrase, march or die. In life, you can decide, are you going to stay where you are and die? Emotionally, relationally, spiritually? You just give up, right? You're existing, but you're dead, really. Or are you going to march, put one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward? But the point there is, it's a decision. You get to decide, and nothing in your past decides for you. No one in your life decides for you. You get to decide. Are you going to take the next step and move forward, or are you going to stay where you are and die? And that is the question, and that is the challenge.
Yeah, it was a challenge. It was a huge challenge for me. And you're right. I had to have some brutal conversations with myself. And then there were some people who are like, hey, if you stay here, here's what's going to happen.
Right.
Take one step. As we move through this, you've developed this methodology and way to reach people. What happens in the case of someone coming through the program? They go through your class, they work on themselves, and then they go out there in life. What's it like when they, embrace freedom like that, Jeremy?
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's scary. It's dangerous in some cases. And we're very open about that. The decisions that you've made this week, when you get home, the same problems will be there, the same person you're married to, the same addictions you struggled with, all of those opportunities is going to be there. So you've made good decisions, but now you need to put the right pieces in place in your life. So for us, during that week, we try to connect people to faith communities in their own hometown. So they have a church or, again, a faith community to go back to if they don't have one. So you're connected into that. And there's some people there built in that can help you. We talk about having the right people in your life. What does a mentor look like? What is it? We call it a corner man, but that person that you can call and reach out to, what does that look like? And that's why we try to walk that out too with them for at least 6 months and beyond, because we know it's amazing. But we also know there are a lot of pitfalls, and we've been through it, and we've seen a lot of other people go through it. And so we want to help walk that out to navigate that. Yeah, it's crazy. You have a guy who goes home and him and his wife have struggled so bad for so many years, and now things are different, right? And he's full of hope and direction, but she's not. She's still living with the old guy, right? And she's still thinking that. So there's so many things to unpack and so much to walk through. The program that we have really is a starting point, but a lot of the work, the important work, happens after that. And we try to the best of our ability to walk that out.
So when you say walk that out, that is, you go through the class, you go through the coursework, you go home, and it may feel like nothing's changed, even though you've changed.
Yeah.
Are you saying that, hey, you know what, if you all are there for when it gets really tough or when a boost is needed?
Yep, we're there. We're proactively reaching out to you every week. How are things going? What are you struggling with? What do you need help with? We have a large network of counselors that are willing to jump in, whether it's individual counseling, substance abuse counseling, marriage counseling. They'll jump into that free of charge. We've got this big network of counselors that are happy to do that. Approaching that from a faith position as well. That's, our position. So they'll continue those conversations that we've had. If it's, whatever it is, there are 1,000 different things people deal with, but we will provide resources. We scholarship our graduates to marriage programs. We don't put them on, but there are other great organizations that do. So you and your spouse can go and get help together. Whatever's needed to help you continue to make these good decisions and take the steps you need to take forward, we'll facilitate that for you. Now, again, it comes back to that decision and you every day deciding to do the right thing, but you're not by yourself. You're not alone. We're there for you, and we'll help you put those pieces in place, take those steps, get those resources, and do what's needed.
As we wind this down, we didn't even touch on the leadership training you do.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe you'll come back on, sir, and talk about that.
Sure.
But as we go through this, you've been with Mighty Oaks for a while. You've been doing this kind of advocacy for a while. But I was curious, what's next? I mean, what do you feel is next for PTSD advocacy and suicide prevention, as a whole, and then for yourself and your foundation?
As a whole, I do feel like, this may address some of your earlier question. I do feel like the military community and the veteran community have really opened up in the last few years to alternatives. We've so long beat up on the VA, and some of that's warranted, some of it's not. But I think the other organizations that exist, the other methods and treatments and therapies, we have really opened up to that. Even in the active duty community, this is something we've seen as we speak to active duty units on resiliency, and they have us come in. There's so much more openness now than there used to be because the struggle is so real and they're trying to figure it out. So I do have a lot of hope for the future. We also now have folks in Congress who are combat veterans who are speaking up on these issues, which we just haven't for a long time. So I think we're making progress. It's always going to be a struggle, but I think in the macro, there's a lot of progress being made. I think for Mighty Oaks, though, we'll just continue to do what we have. I was actually talking to my wife about this yesterday. Just more, right? It's more programs, more opportunities, more speaking into these issues, and doing everything we can to continue to help serve those who have or are serving. We're working a lot with the first responder community as well now. A lot of the same issues, and so we've had opportunities there, and we're continuing to develop that. So we want to develop as the needs develop, but the core of what we do, understanding God has a plan, God has a purpose, there's a direction, and you can move into that if you're willing to take those steps. that message won't change. We'll just apply it in different ways in different places.
Fantastic. I'm watching this program. I want to reach out to Mighty Oaks. What's the best way to connect with you all about the services and programs you offer?
Yeah. Very best way is to go to our website, mightyoaksprograms.org, mightyoaksprograms.org. And a lot of things there about our program, resources that you can download for free. But also, if you're a veteran, active duty service member, first responder, or spouse of one of those, there's a place to apply to the program. Apply. There's no cost for the program. We cover the cost of the program, and we cover the cost of travel to get to the program. So we do everything we can to eliminate every obstacle for folks getting the help they need. So all of that's there. If you'd like to support in another way, there are opportunities there as well. So mightyoaksprograms.org is the very best place to go.
I will have that link in the Oscar Mike Radio show post for this conversation. Again, there's been so much emphasis on what works, what isn't. I think to your earlier point, I agree with you. People are becoming more open about it, and we can't ignore the faith-based side of this. I think, in fact, it needs more attention. I just want to thank you, Jeremy, for coming on and talking with me and being Semper Gumby. It all worked out. I've had an amazing conversation. And yeah, definitely. I mean, the leadership side of you, there's a whole leadership side of what you've done and the teachings you have there and the training you can offer. I would definitely like to explore that at a later time.
Yeah,
but no problem, sir. No problem. We'll make that happen. But you certainly answered a lot of questions for me. And like we talked about before, I'm sitting there like, there's a ton of veteran services organizations, a ton of VA focus, a lot of money being raised. In the state I'm in, when are we going to start seeing some wins here? We need some wins on the board. And I think you've given, me and my watchers and listeners hope. Thank you.
It's good. Well, thank you, Travis. I really appreciate the opportunity. Great conversation, and look forward to continuing it.
Well, sir, as we say in Oscar Mike Radio, we are mission in flight, but also for my Marine guest, Semper Fidelis.
Hey,
it's Travis Oscar Mike Radio. Again, I will have the link to Mighty Oaks Foundation, the Oscar Mike Radio show post. Please reach out to Jeremy if you have any questions. Thank you again. As we say, we're mission in flight.
Remember, Honor teaches our mission. We care about it, we do it every day. But I think there are things that just hit you and give you a reason to go on. The theme for our 2024 for Reach Across America is Live with Purpose. It just seemed to fit in with the vows of the REAP, the 10 attributes that we feel represent our United States military. I thought, what a great opportunity to put those two things together and show our kids through how we act some of the things that can make their lives better, their communities better, and by doing that, the country better. For me, Live with Purpose, I think, is a mindset. Set some guidelines and then go out and purposefully make life different, make a change. It's an opportunity to set an example.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.